Giselle Fontaine confidently called it a graveyard for failed ambitions. She mocked it before 300 people inside Ashford's wealthiest banquet hall. Blind to its potential, she actually smiled when she said it. That doomed corner on Dellwood Street had already swallowed 2 restaurants. A small cafe plus her own project. A $1 million venture erased without a trace. Everyone saw a cursed lot. No one touched it except Caleb Harrington. He brought just $40,000 in savings, and a 6-year-old daughter who still hugged a stuffed bear named Biscuit every single night, and a simple pumpkin soup recipe left behind by his late wife. Giselle Fontaine saw only failure and never looked back. She would spend years deeply regretting that blindness. Stick with me here. What happens when the underdog everyone quietly dismissed suddenly becomes the one unexpected triumph the most powerful woman in town cannot stop thinking about? The morning his quiet victory began, Caleb stood at a cramped kitchen counter barely wide enough to fit a single person, frying 2 eggs in a broken pan he had been meaning to fix for 3 long months. His apartment was just a cheap 2nd-floor rental inside a faded building that smelled vaguely of damp carpet and hissing radiators. The walls were an off-white born from years of everyday struggle, practically pressing in on him from absolutely every single direction. Those drafty windows were thin enough that he heard pigeons thumping onto the fire escape every morning, acting like a very reluctant alarm clock. 33 years old and entirely jobless for the 7th straight month. Yet he moved with the deliberate calm of a man who had already lost the one thing he feared losing most. And yet, he was still breathing. He cracked the eggs into his skillet and just watched them settle, silently worrying about the steep rent due at the end of the week, and the price of a replacement burner gasket required for the tiny catering gig he managed to book for Saturday. He did this totally blank-faced because showing emotion had become a rare luxury he simply could not afford right now. Lily suddenly appeared in the doorway, wearing only one shoe and dragging Biscuit by his ear. She was just 6 years old, with sharp dark eyes and her late mother's habit of asking one question to uncover a dozen. She scrambled up onto the stool, carefully arranging her teddy bear on a folded towel right beside the salt. She watched her father cook with the deep, attentive silence of a kid who had spent way too many mornings in kitchens. Finally, she asked, "Are you going to look at the new restaurant today, Dad?" He softly said he was. She processed that detail with the heavy, particular seriousness she applied to anything that truly mattered to her. "Does Mom know?" Caleb gently set the hot pan down before answering. He studied his daughter, the stuffed bear on the towel, and that pale winter sunlight fighting its way through the thin glass above the sink. He said yes, he firmly believed she did. His wife Maeve had died 18 months prior in a brutal car crash across town on a dark Tuesday evening in November. Driving back from a teaching workshop she had faithfully attended every semester for 4 years. She was only 31 years old. Let's think about this together. She taught Caleb that cooking wasn't about flashing wealth, but about truly keeping people. She always said it, in whichever tiny beat-up kitchen they happened to be renting at the time. Always steady, always perfectly precise. Her hands gliding over the chopping block with the grace of someone who saw exactly how the masterpiece would end before it even began. You see, he never forgot how she tasted food, never rushed, just pure absolute focus. Pausing, adjusting the flavors, finding exactly what the diner truly needed from it. Before she passed away, Caleb ran the kitchen as head chef at Vaulted, a flagship restaurant under the Fontaine Dining Group, the kind of elite business featured in national food magazines, charging $60 for tiny plates that could easily feed a whole struggling family. He suffered through 4 long years there before quitting. It happened when the corporate director tried to force him to swap out several high-quality key ingredients with cheap factory garbage just to pump up their quarterly profits. Most naive customers would never have noticed the downgrade. But a real chef knows value, Caleb bluntly refused. The arrogant director warned him that he didn't actually have a choice. Caleb methodically packed his knives, shook hands with the only 2 cooks he respected, and marched into the freezing February air with zero backup plan, feeling absolutely no regret. That stubborn integrity stayed with him through the hard months. Scraping by teaching online cooking classes for $22 an hour barely paid his utility bills. He sat on $40,000, hoarded over a grueling decade of kitchen labor. Let's trace the investment. After 2 quiet years grieving Maeve, he checked the listing for 14 Dellwood. He read it 4 separate times before finally admitting he needed to go see the space. Driving down on a Thursday morning, he kept it totally secret. He already knew his friends would call him crazy. But he needed to evaluate the raw potential for himself. He arrived totally alone. The space was a 90 square meter, gutted commercial shell sitting on the ground floor of an old brick building. Built way back in the early 1960s, the place was barely kept alive by years of total neglect. A giant crack in the front window was cheaply patched with electrical tape. Scuffed concrete floors hid underneath a nasty layer of yellowing linoleum peeling heavily at the corners. The dingy walls wore a sad shade of beige that used to be white. The whole gutted room smelled heavily of moisture and settled dust, plus a faint metallic stench leaking from a rusted drainpipe in the dark back hallway. Aldrich Webb, the exhausted landlord, was 70 years old. He wore a faded canvas jacket and the numb expression of a guy totally used to delivering awful news to blind dreamers. He warned Caleb plainly that 2 previous startups had completely failed within 4 months. Under absolutely zero circumstances would he be willing to refund the security deposit. This gritty neighborhood had a terrible reputation, and he wasn't going to sugarcoat it. Webb stepped aside, letting Caleb walk the miserable little room by himself. Caleb paced the empty floor slowly, running hands along walls, stomping his boot to test the subfloor, measuring the narrow kitchen corridor with his experienced eyes, mentally mapping out the hot stoves, the cold storage, prep tables, and the service pass-through. He suddenly stopped at the far wall. A jagged crack in the broken plaster allowed a brilliant ray of afternoon sunshine that sliced right across the dirty concrete in a bright diagonal. He stood perfectly still in that exact spot. He remembered Maeve. He thought about a harsh winter when they lived in a freezing, tiny basement apartment way up in the city's northeast corner. A miserable hole with zero natural sunlight and a landlord who fixed absolutely nothing. She knew what we know. The absolute worst spaces hide the brightest light. You and I know, you just have to look closer. Caleb stared at the cracked floor and pale dust. Where others saw a wreck, he saw a canvas. Beneath all that accumulated grime, the room had incredible bones. He locked down an 18-month lease before even stepping outside. 40 minutes later, Owen Garrett called, totally convinced Caleb had lost his absolute mind taking this ruin on. Charlotte Voss showed up that evening. She studied the lease and his Underdog startup budget with the cold, unhurried precision of a seasoned pro. She slowly shook her head, yet offered to manage his accounting for free for the first 3 months. She made the offer like watching him fail wasn't an option. That exact night, he officially named the spot Maeve's Corner, sitting right at the kitchen table while Lily ate cereal opposite him. Hearing the name, she clapped both hands, a pure certain belief in this crazy gamble. Hearing via text, Owen sent a short reply, choosing to drink a lonely beer and doubt the vision. The entire concept thrived in Caleb's mind long before any ink dried. A cozy neighborhood dining space featuring a rotating seasonal menu. A single daily chalkboard special, with plates priced from $18 to $22. No fancy printed wine list, no rigid courses, absolutely zero theater. A total rebellion against everything he hated about Fontaine's rigid philosophy. He would source from 3 local farms and a trusted fishmonger he knew for years. Every broth made entirely from scratch. Every autumn, Maeve's legendary pumpkin soup hit the menu, never altering that perfect recipe by even a single pinch. Weeks into scraping away the decay during the grueling renovation. 5 months of sweat on nights and weekends while teaching culinary workshops all day long. Right here's where it gets interesting for us. Caleb found hidden papers jammed under those rotting floorboards. He yanked them from the damp dirt, brushed them off, and tossed them onto his makeshift plywood desk. He casually flipped through those first few stained pages. He recognized the Fontaine Dining Group letterhead. Then he shoved the envelope away without reading another word. He just went right back to painting, completely blind to what he had just unearthed. He would obsess over it later. Meanwhile, mid-October brought the Ashford Culinary Excellence Awards at the Harwood Grand Hotel. Think high ceilings and circular tables draped in expensive cream linen. This was the ultimate powerhouse gathering for the local food scene every single calendar year, packed with elite restaurateurs, chefs, investors, and food writers, plus local politicians who loved basking in that shiny culinary prestige. Fontaine Dining Group bought out 3 of the night's major award categories, flexing their power for 5 straight years. Giselle Fontaine delivered the arrogant keynote before the ceremony even began. 40 years old, wearing a sleek black wrap dress and tiny expensive gold earrings, she glided across that stage with the smug, unhurried certainty of a woman who had never ever been the weakest player in any room she walked into. Over 12 years, she built her massive restaurant empire from a single tiny French bistro into a 12-property monopoly dominating the entire eastern half of the state. But she never actually ate in her own establishments. She proudly saw that detached emptiness as extreme discipline. What do you and I see here? A CEO boasting about rigorous standards, totally blind to the underdog about to crush her. Midway through, she paused to highlight the business lessons that carried the steepest price tags. She called out Dellwood Corner directly. She claimed her corporate restaurant group poured money in. 3 years ago, they walked away, not because her massive company lacked a vision, but because she believed some ground just could not grow what was planted. She called the spot a black hole that swallowed cash and gave zero. Then she dropped the line Caleb would remember long after the night was over. That entire block is a graveyard for broken dreams. It stands as proof that not every piece of real estate is worth saving. Some spots are just for losers with nowhere else to go. The wealthy crowd clapped politely. A few chuckled at the insult. But you and I must watch the back tables. Caleb sat by the service doors. An old kitchen buddy from his past job had sneaked him in as a guest for the free meal. He only showed up for the food. The alternative meant eating alone inside his completely gutted storefront. He stayed frozen in his seat, taking in Giselle's brutal takedown of the exact spot where he just risked every last dime he had. He stared down at his rough hands, 5 solid months of ripping out old floorboards, hanging heavy drywall, sealing windows, hauling old furniture, and carefully seasoning a stack of cast iron, scraped together one by one from a cheap South Side junkyard. He studied his palms, gave a single quiet nod to nobody in particular, and walked out before dessert. Later, walking to her car, Giselle took a phone call from Marcus. She demanded the latest news on buying up Dellwood Corner, her ruthless scheme to swallow every empty retail space on that street, and flip the strip into a high-end dining chain under the Fontaine 11 brand. Marcus broke the bad news. Some independent guy had just grabbed the lease for Unit 14 on an 18-month deal. Giselle stopped cold. She asked who. Marcus said, Caleb Harrington. 3 heavy seconds of dead silence. She knew that exact name. The talented head chef she had personally fired 2 years ago. The guy who rejected her cheap ingredients on principle. You and I know true success often starts with a hard no. She simply said he will be gone in 6 months. She did not sound angry. It was just the smug tone of a CEO stating what she thought was an absolute fact. Maeve's Corner opened early one Saturday in November. No flashy press releases, no fancy corporate launch parties at all. Just a cheap chalkboard resting on the sidewalk, the daily menu written out in Caleb's neat handwriting. A rich pot of pumpkin soup simmering. On the back stove since 9 a.m., little Lily stood behind the host stand, holding a stuffed dog in her lap, clutching a handmade cardboard sign she absolutely insisted on taping up in the front window. In her messy 6-year-old handwriting, it read, "Today's special made with love." Caleb just stared at it. He took a long second, smiled, said yes, and then stuck it to the glass itself. He didn't change a single crooked letter. 11 customers walked in that first day. Mostly curious locals, pulled in by the incredible smell and the rare sight of new life on a doomed block. We know success starts here. Picture this. Charlotte Voss walked in at noon, ordered pumpkin soup, and ate in silence. Setting her spoon down, she finally spoke. This is something I did not know I was missing. Owen, who eventually caved in and agreed to work 3 unpaid lunch shifts weekly for the very first month. Just standing in the back, pretending to fix the exhaust hood. Week 2 brought 20 daily covers, a failing diner to some but a start. Those slow numbers perfectly matched his exact loss tolerance for month 1. He tracked every single dime in a cheap red paper notebook, writing it all out, just like Charlotte taught him. Because manual math forces you to face the grind where true growth happens. He logged every vendor bill, every single cover, every half-eaten plate, every bit of kitchen praise, and every brutal repair bill. Then Aldrich Webb walked in on day 10, a quiet Tuesday around 12:30. He grabbed a window seat, bought the lunch special, paid cash silently, and walked out. But he showed up again the next morning, and the next. By the time week 2 wrapped, he had dined there 7 times. They never spoke about it, just a silent mutual respect building between them. But the equipment that pushed Caleb to the absolute brink wasn't the faulty stove or the nightmare of running a kitchen with barely 2 active cooks. It was the dish machine, which failed entirely on day 23, right in the middle of a packed Saturday dinner rush. Fixing it cost $420, drained straight from his emergency fund. To survive the hit, he sold the absolute last valuable thing he still owned. A beat-up stainless steel watch with a scratched face. An old wedding gift, engraved on the back in Maeve's handwriting. He pawned it that Monday morning and hit the kitchen stoves before 11. He never told a single soul. Stick with me here. By month 2, the cafe won over steady neighborhood working families. Retired couples filling tables every single weekday morning. A few local professionals who made it their regular spot. A small food blogger even praised that pumpkin soup in an article about neighborhood dining, which sparked another modest little wave of curious diners. To outsiders failing, but that daily revenue was rock solid. Charlotte always preached that consistency is the only true marker of success in month 2. And that quiet survival was enough to ping Fontaine Dining Group's corporate radar. A suit named Marcus walked in on Thursday afternoon. Dressed too sharp for the room, ordering a coffee he ignored. 5 minutes later, he slid a formal contract across. An offer to buy out his remaining lease for $120 grand. Caleb heard the pitch, smiled gently, and passed. Marcus returned Monday, bumping the buyout to $180,000. Caleb smiled and rejected him again. Both conversations were totally polite and clear. 2 days later, Giselle herself rang the kitchen phone directly. Her tone was perfectly steady. "You and I know that tone, the slick voice of a predator who has negotiated enough to bury any real emotion. You and I know success hides." She told him his spot had no future, offering a quick exit. Caleb held the phone, watching little Lily draw at a corner prep table. Sketching a dog with huge ears, her tongue stuck out in pure creative focus. He confidently replied, "Thank you, but I don't need an exit." Then came the very next week. Right at the brutal Friday lunch peak, a health inspectors barged in. To most, this spelled absolute failure. The mandatory 2-hour shutdown for the inspection cost Caleb dearly. He lost vital daily revenue, leaving a packed, bustling dining room totally confused and empty. But the inspector found absolutely nothing. Every surface spotless, logs completely filled, and every single storage tub perfectly labeled. Caleb always ran flawless kitchens. He held this underestimated underdog spot to the exact same standard of a 3-star restaurant. Once the closure lifted, Owen pulled him aside. "That was no coincidence," he whispered. Caleb already knew that stubborn fact. But without hard proof, a pattern means basically nothing. That evening, Charlotte delivered a grim, highly precise financial forecast. If this corporate bullying kept up, their cash flow wouldn't survive past 2.5 months. She delivered the bleak news perfectly calmly. Her reading glasses sitting near the open notebook, resting between them. Caleb thanked her, sitting quietly with the harsh reality afterward. His mind drifted to the envelope hidden safely away. Late that night, entirely alone, he finally opened it up and read every single word. Buried right among those old blueprints and site plans was a single lease addendum between the massive Fontaine Dining Group and Aldrich Webb, signed 3 years ago. The legal jargon was heavy, but the hidden truth was obvious. The massive corporation had paid Webb hefty upfront cash, falsely logged on paper as a consulting fee. It bought a shady exclusivity deal, strictly blocking him from leasing Unit 14 out to any rival food or drink business for a solid 3 years. It lacked signatures, but Giselle's initials sat proudly in the margins, printed on official Fontaine letterhead. If they enforced it, Caleb's entire lease was totally dead. Let's look closer together. If the city board examined it, it proved highly illegal trade suppression. The giant company never officially filed it. It just sat as a draft hidden under dusty floorboards for 3 long years. This meant it was a loaded weapon they simply couldn't fire, without triggering the exact legal nightmare they desperately wanted to avoid. Caleb slowly folded the document, slipped it back inside, and slid the envelope right into his drawer. For the first time since Marcus arrived with that briefcase, Caleb saw his underdog advantage. He finally saw his power on the board. Diana Ashworth walked in on a Wednesday during the 3rd month, no reservation and 0 obvious reason to be near this humble, underestimated neighborhood. A small woman in her early 60s, wrapped in a simple brown linen coat, low shoes, short silver hair, and the totally unhurried vibe of someone used to letting the truth reveal itself naturally. You and I recognize that quiet power. She claimed a quiet corner table right by the window, ordered the rich pumpkin soup and seared trout with greens, along with house water, quietly eating without checking her phone or saying a single word. You and I know people write off slow midweek afternoons, but Caleb always served tables himself then, while Owen managed the kitchen. He refilled her water glass just once, never hovering around. She was almost finished with her soup when she finally looked up, asking exactly how long he had been making it. He told her 11 years, but the recipe wasn't his. She simply asked whose it was. He told her the truth about Maeve, how she perfected that exact balance of cream to stock the autumn she turned 24 and never once adjusted it since. Because, as she said, once you found something that worked for people, you did not change it without a reason. The woman at the table listened quietly, staring directly into her bowl. She didn't write a single thing down, just asked one final question. Was his wife still cooking? He just answered no. He quietly explained that she had been gone for 18 months now. Diana Ashworth thanked him for the lunch, paid in cash, left a completely normal tip, and walked right out. He wouldn't realize who she actually was until exactly 3 weeks later. The glowing review dropped in the Meridian Fork, the region's oldest and most prestigious culinary publication. It pulled a readership far beyond Ashford, instantly commanding the attention of every serious hospitality professional statewide. Diana Ashworth had given Maeve's corner 4 quick lines of technical praise, dedicating the rest of the half-page column to something completely unmeasurable. She wrote that this humble restaurant didn't try impressing anyone. She noted that it simply fed people deliberately, in the truest, oldest sense of the word. Pure attention, 0 flashy performance. Her final line hit hard. Sometimes what you need most is not a meal that shows off, but a room where someone cooked for you as though it mattered. The impact was absolutely immediate. Within 72 hours, the reservation book was completely packed for the upcoming 2 weekends. Walk-in foot traffic exploded so much that Caleb finally had to launch a daily waitlist. Now watch the corporate side. Giselle Fontaine read that review in her office Friday morning, her coffee turning completely cold. She read the whole thing twice. She immediately ordered Marcus to investigate whether Ashworth held any prior personal or professional connections to Harrington. Marcus reported back fast, none he could find. That reality rattled her far more than a dirty connection would have. Late that night, long after the kitchen finally closed and Lily had crashed out on the small prep room sofa, with Biscuit tucked safely right beside her, Caleb sat totally alone at the window table, staring at the printed copy Charlotte left for him. He read it slowly, taking every word in, hitting that final sentence he just stopped. He sat with it for a long time in that perfectly quiet room. Then he pressed both hands flat on the paper, crying silently without moving a muscle. That overwhelming way people cry when they aren't even trying to shed a tear. His first real tears since the afternoon of Maeve's funeral. He wasn't sure what broke loose. He only knew that final sentence sounded exactly like something she would have said in some windowless basement kitchen. Tasting a pot of soup, nodding slowly, and deciding it was finally ready. 2 short weeks after the review. A flashy pop-up restaurant opened right across the street from Maeve's corner, taking a storefront vacant since last spring. It arrived completely without warning. Slick promotional materials, plus completely free tastings for the first 7 days. Run by a trendy young chef with massive followers and a heavy social media presence who hadn't. We see right through it. He'd never previously expressed any real interest in the Dellwood neighborhood. This pop-up served modern small plates. They ran a free entry format for 1 week, pulling in massive crowds. You and I know success attracts vultures. That week, an anonymous forum post surfaced questioning the sourcing practices at Maeve's Corner. It claimed without proof that Caleb lacked the proper management certifications to legally run a food business. It also suggested the restaurant's rising fame relied completely on faking their ingredient quality. The post used just enough industry jargon to sound completely believable to the average reader. Naturally, the rumor spread fast. Owen traced the digital footprint, hitting a dead end at a commercial IP relay. It was just enough to suggest a coordinated attack, but not enough to prove. Soon, loyal customers started questioning Caleb about these exact claims. Some even brought printouts. He calmly answered every single question, showing off supplier invoices, delivery logs, and inspection records, never making anyone feel bad for asking. Some regulars stayed loyal, others vanished for 2 weeks, then 3. In the 2 weeks after the post, reservations plunged by almost a third. Unprompted, Charlotte updated their financial forecast, carrying the notebook into the kitchen before morning service. She left it open on the pass, saying absolutely nothing. 2.5 months of cash left if things held. That night, Caleb sat by Lily's bed. She was fast asleep, arm wrapped around Biscuit, breathing perfectly slow and even. He thought quietly. He could accept $180,000. He could shut down Maeve's Corner, secure their future, and find another kitchen later. Lily would never want for anything material. Most people would fold here. He sat with that thought, turning it over until it took its final solid shape. Then his mind flashed back to quitting Vaulted, coming home after surrendering his station keys. Maeve was sitting at their kitchen table, her hands wrapped warmly around a mug of tea, looking right at him with that absolute, unshakable steadiness she brought to everything that truly mattered. She only asked if he had been right. He told her yes. She replied, "Then there is nothing to regret." Recognizing the path forward, he stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer. Before opening the next morning, he tracked down Aldrich Webb, carrying that manila envelope under his arm. Webb brought him into the back office, cleared off a chair, and silently poured coffee from a stovetop pot. Caleb set the documents on the table, waiting patiently as Webb read through them. The older man studied every single page with the caution of someone who never expected those papers to resurface. Finishing the stack, he placed them down and stared blankly at the wall for a moment. He finally admitted they had called it a simple consulting retainer. He confessed he never read the complete addendum when he signed the paperwork. Look, he was not a dishonest guy, and he didn't pretend to be one. He was just an older man handed complicated legal jargon and a plausible story, who never thought to dig deeper. This is where you and I see the tides turn. He agreed to go on record, stating the clause hid its real legal implications. He also confirmed his lease agreement with Caleb remained completely valid and in good standing. He stated this without flinching, then poured more coffee. They sat quietly in that back office for a few minutes, finding strength in the silence. That exact same evening, Diana. Ashworth called Caleb to talk things over. You and I know a setup when we see it. Her journalism contact spotted the fake forum posts right away. She didn't hold back. 22 years of reporting gave her a sharp eye for the exact difference between a truly failing business and a restaurant under attack by a wealthy rival. She asked him to go on the record for a follow-up story. He agreed. That evening, Charlotte, Owen, Caleb, Webb, and Diana huddled around the big prep table inside the dark kitchen. Under harsh fluorescent lights, they pulled up dining chairs and started mapping out their survival plan. Charlotte detailed their exact financial risks. Owen mapped the timeline and shared his partial trace on that fake online post. Webb explained exactly what documents he would sign. Diana sat quietly, taking meticulous notes on every single detail. By midnight, their massive comeback strategy formed. Webb's lawyer would submit a sworn affidavit to the Commercial Conduct Board to strike down that shady exclusivity deal. Diana was ready to drop her explosive article. Caleb would host a local community night, to win back the absolute trust of his surrounding neighborhood. Just past 11 p.m., while the group was still strategizing, Caleb's personal cell phone lit up with a text from an anonymous number. It showed a leaked internal email sent by Marcus directly to Giselle Fontaine. The text detailed the exact tactical sabotage campaign launched against Maeve's Corner. The fake health violations, the sudden pop-up block, the online smears. Marcus used one specific chilling word to describe his mission. His objective, which he claimed to have finished, was to, quote, neutralize them. You and I might wonder who sent this. They stayed hidden. Caleb instantly passed the phone to Charlotte. She quietly secured a backup copy first. Slipping the device away, he returned to the group and smiled. We have everything we need. Diana's massive feature in the Meridian Fork never explicitly named the Fontaine dining group. Honestly, it didn't even have to. She exposed a crystal-clear history of extreme regulatory sabotage, brutal online smear campaigns, and a secret monopoly tactic used to crush a small diner that simply refused to sell out. All happening on one street, in a suspiciously short window right after a glowing local food review. The bold headline read, "Who is truly terrified of Maeve's Corner?" Dropping on Thursday, 4 major regional news outlets picked up the story before Monday morning. The Ashford Commercial Conduct Board finally acted, launching a rapid investigation the very next week, sparked by the heavy legal filing from Webb's lawyer, his sworn statement, plus those old contracts hidden beneath the floorboards, proving the restrictive lease deal was completely built on a foundation of deliberate lies. The official legal paperwork framed the entire situation as extreme illegal corporate bullying. It was so specific that everybody in the neighborhood knew exactly whose so-called success was actually built on failure. Let's watch the mighty fall. Giselle rang Caleb at 7 a.m. when the news broke. Her tone was totally different. That icy confidence she always projected was gone, replaced by a desperate, heavy, visible strain. A forced calm from someone realizing they were the actual failure. You and I know a business looks very different when the community holds it together. The CEO suddenly claimed she wanted to resolve the situation. She offered well over $180,000. She stressed the word settlement twice. She insisted his little restaurant was a total failure that would only drain his money forever. She claimed this was his last chance to grab a corporate buyout and walk away. Caleb just stood at the back of his kitchen, resting one hand right on the edge of the reach-in cooler. He watched through that small kitchen window right into the dining room, where Owen was prepping tables for the afternoon lunch service, carefully folding napkins and aligning salt and pepper, showing that deep, careful devotion he always tried hiding. Caleb waited until her corporate speech ended. Then he simply said, I want a settlement. I want to open up today, tomorrow, and next year. I do not need anything beyond that. He spoke calmly without any anger, precise and focused, exactly how he plated a perfect dish. A long, heavy pause hung on the line. He heard her slow exhale. It sounded less like confident composure and more like her powerful corporate armor was finally cracking right open. The phone call ended. That afternoon, Marcus resigned from Fontaine Dining Group. His quick email blamed personal reasons, but literally nobody inside the failing company believed him. Exactly 2 days later, Giselle's PR team desperately issued a press statement. They claimed the massive company had zero involvement in anonymous online smear campaigns and denied knowing about any shady irregularities in the Dellwood block's commercial leasing. The statement's highly careful passive corporate phrasing was legally defensible, but completely and utterly unconvincing. Let's be real. Nobody who actually read Diana's investigative article believed them. The big community night at Maeve's Corner happened on a Friday, exactly 2 weeks after the article dropped. Without any formal advertising, word organically spread right through the neighborhood. It traveled through Charlotte's loyal contacts and those early regular guests who supported them from month one. Every single table was packed within the first hour. Lily stood proudly at the door in a bright yellow sweater, handing guests simple folded paper. Menace she quickly printed from the scrappy restaurant's only desktop computer. She added a tiny hand-drawn soup bowl in the corner, just because she firmly believed that every good menu needed pictures. Webb showed up early, grabbing a seat at the table near the kitchen window. He happily ordered the pumpkin soup and the braised short rib, and he ate both courses quite slowly. He watched the busy room with deep satisfaction, the quiet joy of a man who knew true success was blossoming right where others only saw failure. Much later in the evening, when the bustling dining room had finally thinned down to just a few tables, a lone woman walked inside and waited quietly by the front door. She looked to be in her mid-30s, wearing plain clothes, and introduced herself as Jessica Brandt. She confessed she had spent 4 long years working corporate operations at Fontaine. They fired her because she absolutely refused to authorize a totally fake supplier quality certification. She had seen Diana's brave article. She simply said she felt the right time had finally come. She did not demand a table or ask for anything special at all. She just stood in that doorway, bravely delivering the truth she needed to share. Then she softly mentioned hearing amazing things about their soup for weeks. Caleb personally brought her a hot bowl. He gently set it down without any ceremony, refilled her water glass, and stepped back. "You and I know true success hides." He realized folks don't walk in just seeking validation. They simply crave a small business that feels completely genuine. Recognizing that quiet victory, he left her in peace. 3 months later, the Ashford Commercial Conduct Board's initial corporate investigation was still quietly dragging on. Fontaine Dining Group officially placed their aggressive Dellwood takeover plans on indefinite pause. Talk of Fontaine 11 completely vanished from their corporate press releases that season. Giselle Fontaine stayed on as chief executive, still showing her face at major industry events. But that arrogant, untouchable confidence was noticeably fading away. She no longer looked like a leader who never failed in front of an audience. Meanwhile, the so-called loser diner was fully packed for lunch and dinner 6 weeks straight. Growth meant Caleb hired a second-line cook, a young guy named Dex. The kid hustled hard, stayed quiet, and mastered the menu twice as fast as anyone. Caleb trained him well, and the small restaurant kitchen finally found a rhythm that felt totally sustainable rather than just barely scraping by. Owen Garrett inked a formal partnership deal over soup on a wet Tuesday morning. He took a 20% stake for sweat equity and daily kitchen hustle, plus 1 free weekly meal for himself and whoever he wanted to invite. He demanded that specific clause, and Charlotte silently added it right into their business contract. Charlotte walked in on the very first Thursday of the 4th month, holding the weathered notebook and receipt folder she kept since their struggling start. She flipped to the current financial summary, setting the ledger down right between them. And she quietly tapped a single line resting at the bottom of the page. "Look closely with me." Revenue had finally topped expenses for the first time. She did not give a grand speech. She just tapped the profit and nodded once. Caleb stared down at that unlikely victory for a long, silent moment. Then he shut the book, slid it into his chef coat pocket, and softly thanked her. She simply went back to her coffee. On that week's final night, Caleb stayed late after closing to finish the prep work. He killed the main dining room lights, working totally alone in the kitchen under the stove's single strip light, portioning out stock and writing tomorrow's menu in his neat, careful block letters. He heard the street outside, passing cars and a window sliding open up above. Just the ordinary sounds of a bustling city block in the late evening. A neighborhood that was fully alive and pushing forward. He found deep comfort in that noise, a peace only familiar, hard-earned sounds can bring. Sounds proving the world keeps spinning at its regular pace, and you still belong here. He went to check on Lily before calling it a night. She was sound asleep on the little sofa in the prep room's back corner, resting exactly where she had slept through more struggling nights than he could count. Curled sideways with Biscuit hugged tight to her stomach, her breathing slow, even, and totally perfect. That original cardboard sign she had proudly made and insisted on using day one. The one he secretly replaced twice with fresh cardboard, carefully tracing her childish letters so it never changed. It still hung in the front window, its edges curling slightly from age and window condensation. Today's daily special made with love. He lingered in the narrow doorway between the prep room and the main kitchen. "You and I see the real success," his daughter, the bear that window sign. "Watch the streetlight hit the glass. You and I know true victory is quiet." He just went back and finished cooking. Nobody ever called Maeve's Corner the finest spot in Ashford. They didn't need to. True success isn't always built for awards. This place was designed for something deeper, a quiet haven where people returned week after week for ordinary comfort. They came back without any special reason, simply because it felt right. That kind of loyalty is far harder to fake than hype. It takes a chef who knows a meal isn't some arrogant statement. Instead, it's a genuine act of care for the person sitting at the table. And it takes a dining room that breathes that exact same vibe. Meanwhile, Giselle Fontaine, with all the endless money, cold strategy, and massive empire she had built, she completely failed to grasp that feeling. She only knew how to impress. For years, she mistook flashy success for true connection. She did it in so many fancy boardrooms that she went blind to the real difference. But Caleb Harrington, he recognized the real win years ago. He watched his wife tweak a soup recipe down in a cramped, windowless basement kitchen. She tasted it, nodded slowly, and whispered, "Now this will keep someone going." He flicked off the last light, locked up tight, and carried his sleeping daughter out to the car. Her toy tucked away, while the cold city buzzed quietly around their small, hidden triumph. He would unlock those front doors again at 11 in the morning. Soup is hot by 10, you and I know that's enough.